So how can you create bones in 3dsMax? Well, the old way is to go into Systems, click on Bones, and then you can actually do some certain things that are similar to creating a bone system. However, that's not the preferred way that I'd like you to do these things, because we have an extremely useful dedicated tool in 3dsMax for creating bones, and you get a lot more flexibility and a lot more control by using the bone tool. And the bone tool can be found if you go into the animation, bone tools. Once you click on it, you will get this pop-up that has a set of functions and tools that you can use. Now, create bone is the exact same thing that you can see here. In fact, it actually is simply a shortcut to get to the systems and bones so that you can start creating your bones. And in here, we can actually determine what our default values for each bones will be. So I'm just going to make them a little bit higher, wider and thicker, so it's clearer to see. And now, while I'm in create bones mode, as long as it's highlighted, every time I click, I will be placing a bone. So if I click here, I've placed a bone. If I click again, another one, click another one, click another one, and then I'm gonna right click and it ends here. So several things have happened that I would like to get your attention to when creating bones. And let's just switch to a shaded view so that you can see a little bit more clearly. So first of all, what has happened is that each time I click, I create a new bone. And I create it at the location of the cursor. And as I click, each new bone that has been created is automatically being parented to the previous object. So in a word, I am creating a hierarchy of pivot points or objects. And bones are basically simply pivot points that have a dedicated visual representation. So the other thing that you should always remember is that you are creating a hierarchy, and the first object that you create will be the root of your hierarchy. So for example, for a leg, I would absolutely never start from a toe, then a foot, then a calf, and then a thigh, simply because this is a completely backwards type of a thing, because we do not move our legs are not rooted in such a way that our toes are the root of the hierarchy. Our hips or the thigh bone is the root of the hierarchy, but if you do this, then it's completely wrong. So you have to keep in mind that the first object that you create, the first bone that you create, is going to be the root of the hierarchy that you're creating. So you have to think a little bit about it. So the first I do is hips, then a knee, then an ankle, a foot bone, and then I finish off by right-clicking. So when I'm done with everything, then I'm just gonna click here as my toes, and if I'm done and I no longer want to add any bones, I simply right-click and 3dsMax creates this tip bone, which is necessary for my IK chain, for my bone chain. And now I have a bone hierarchy, which it represents my leg, which is great. But suppose to say that I wanted to move this object or adjust this chain a little bit. Well, before we go on to that, I want to explain one thing and get your attention towards one thing. Let's say that I wanted to, like on other objects, that I wanted to simply adjust the pivot point of any of these bones. Look what happens. It is not possible to separate the so-called object bone and the pivot point itself. This is further proving the point that I made, which is that the bones themselves are simply pivot points which have a dedicated visualization option so that we can, as humans, interpret them in a more friendly manner. As such, it's useful to actually understand how that works and that that property is there, so that when you create your hierarchy, that you understand what it is that you're creating and what's possible and what's not possible. With that in mind, Let's explore the hierarchy that's been created. Well, it behaves exactly like any other FK hierarchy would. Parent controls the child doesn't control the parent. Okay, so far so good. What happens if I try to move a bone? Well, it doesn't work. And it again behaves like sort of like a regular FK hierarchy, but here you can see that we can't actually move a child independent from its parent. That's one of the first differences. So the only thing you can do is actually rotate or, God forbid, scale. This is not something that you want to do ever. You just want to basically rotate your bones. So no moving. So how do I then go about in editing this knee joint if I wanted to make it a little bit higher or move it a little bit to a different type of position? Well, we have this dedicated button in the bone tools called bone edit mode. And once I enter the bone edit mode, now when I try to move, then the hierarchy is not broken and I'm free to reposition the joint where I need it to. Furthermore, you can even rotate without it disconnecting, but you will get extremely strange results. So I highly discourage you from ever rotating in bone edit mode. Bone edit mode should be used for moving and manual fine-tuning of the placement of these bones only, nothing else. So let's say that I've modified this position a little bit and then I am happy with that. I'm gonna click again to exit the bone mode, and now if I try to move it, it behaves like before. So that's good. Now there's another tool that's very useful, and I'd like to show you that on a slightly different example. So I'm just going to switch to a front view. I'm going to move this leg somewhere around here. I'm going to click on create bones. I'm going to create a bone right up to maybe here. So I'm just going to left click again and then right click to end it. I right click again to exit the create bones mode. Okay, so now I have a leg and something that will represent or represents the building block of my spine, neck and head chain. So I know that my body or the spine, hips, spine, neck and the head are all in one same line. So in order to actually make that much easier for me to create, I'm just going to create one vertical bone to roughly where my head should end. And then I'm going to click on the refine button, and I'm simply going to click where I want new bones, new bone links to be added. So I want first to have a hips bone, so I'm just going to click here, a very small one. Then I'm going to have spine 1, spine 2, spine 3. Then this is going to be my chest bone, which is much more rigid. And this is going to be my neck and the head bone. And once I'm done with refining, I can just right click. So now I have many links, which is excellent. So maybe now I would like to edit the positions of my bones. So maybe the first spine should be a little bit back here, and then to introduce a little bit of a spine bend. Of course, this is very exaggerated, but still you get the point of what the editing is here. So now we get hips, spine, chest, neck, head, and I can maybe adjust the head a little bit here. And in no time I got this upper body link as well. So far so good. I can exit my bone edit mode, and I would now like to show combined use of different tools and different techniques that I've showed so far to create the actual arm. So from the top view, this is my foot, this is my leg. So I'm in create bones mode. I'm just gonna click here to create an arm, and I'm gonna click here and right click to end it. So this is going to be the length of my arm. I want to add my elbow somewhere around here and maybe the wrist around there. And then I can start to position everything normally. So I've just lifted here. And then I remember, oh, but I actually forgot to add something. I forgot to add the clavicle bone. So no problem, I'm just going to hit refine here. And because I need to refine the position, I'm just going to go into bone edit mode. I'm going to move this clavicle here. I'm going to move my shoulder a little bit back. And I'm going to move the clavicle forward as it usually is normally placed. Next, while still in bone edit mode, I'm going to move my elbow a little bit back, adjust the position of my wrist, and maybe the hand is pointing a little bit downwards. So now I'm happy with this setup, or maybe I'm not. Maybe I want this a little bit out. Maybe I want this one to be completely a little bit more up. In that case, I could select all of these guys and move them a little bit up. So that works. There we go. And let's say that this is the setup that I am happy with. This is some kind of an ape because he has unbelievably long arms, but hey ho, that's what it is. So now we need to actually make this whole thing a hierarchy that is actually connected. So I want my hips to naturally control and drive the legs and the arms themselves as well. So this whole thing needs to become one hierarchy. So the way we do this is with regular parenting. So I can simply click on the child and on this case the thigh bone, and I'm gonna select my link tool. I'm gonna left click, drag and release on the hips. And you can see that in the hierarchy we have parented it. I'm going to do the same thing with the clavicle. Left click, hold onto the chest bone, and that's that. So now if I hit W to exit the select and link, I'm going to click my hips, and now when I move it, it's all linked together. Excellent. And now we have just one more thing left to do, which is we need the other side of these limbs as well. While we can certainly create them manually, which is what you don't want to do, you can also select and shift drag and copy them. It's also something you don't want to do, simply because it's a little bit unnecessary. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click on this guy, and I'm gonna click on the mirror tool itself. So it's asking me around which axis do you want to flip it, and also which is the bone axis to flip. So I want to flip around the X axis, so I just want it to go mirror on the other side, not from left to right, not front to back or top to bottom, because this is front to back and this is top to bottom. So I want it side to side. Not very noticeable on the foot, but that's why we have this offset button that we can easily kind of offset it where it needs to be. All right. Then we need one more thing to actually keep in mind, and that is this bone axis to flip. You should switch to Z if it's not there by default, simply because, and hit OK. Because if you look at it, you won't see any difference here. However, if I switch to local and you now take a look at these axes, they work. But let me make another copy here as well. I'm going to offset it a little bit further, and I'm just switch it to Y. And now, if you actually look at the original, this is how our axes are aligned. X down, Z, Y. And this one is flipped around. So now our y-axis is no longer pointing in the right direction. This is a problem, and this is something that you should really be aware of in Max when when mirroring bones. So you should always make sure that your copy y-axis or the axes themselves are pointing in the exact same direction. Otherwise you will have problems with IK and some other things at a later stage. So let's repeat the process so that now you know what you're looking for. I'm going to double click and select the hierarchy of the leg. And for this case scenario, I'm actually going to unlink these two so that you will see why shortly. So I'm going to double click on the leg. I'm going to click on mirror. I'm choosing the x-axis and I'm just gonna roughly guesstimate where my leg is, somewhere around there. But the most important part is bone axis to flip. I will switch it to Z so that it actually points in the right direction as the original. And as I hit OK, I'm going to make sure that in local axis, not in the view, in the local axis, that my bone axes actually point in the same direction so that everything is correct. So that's good. Now I'm going to do the same thing with the arm. I'm going to mirror and everything is as it was before, which is fine. So I'm just going to hit OK, make sure that the axes point in the right direction. Yep, everything is good. Elbow, elbow, everything's good. So now I need to address one last thing. I'm going to switch to the view coordinates and I no longer need the bone tools. I'm going to center my spine to 0 so that x and y is 0, and that I know that now if my leg is at x, let's say minus 12, that the other one can safely be placed at 12 units on x and it will be the exact same distance from the center bone. It's a very nifty little trick that saves a lot of time, so it's something that you can definitely use, and you should use it, and keep in mind that your character needs to be centered. So in this case the arm was minus 10 and here it's going to be plus 10, and now this is centered, and now I'm free to simply select my thigh bones, select and link them to the hips, select my clavicles and link them to the chest. And now I have a fully operational hierarchy of a humanoid biped with some strange proportions, but it's all there. So the next thing that you would naturally do would be to rename all of the bones adequately so that you know what you're working with. But essentially, those are the basics of how you use your bone tools and how to create properly bone hierarchy in 3ds Max.